Thank you so much, Daniela, for this kind introduction, and to you and Verena and the whole standing group team for giving us the floor, giving us this opportunity to present our research here today. I want to start by saying that the topic and the research we will be presenting here today is coming out of a special issue published in the Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies this year, the link for which I have just posted in the chat. So if you want to look up some of the papers that provided the basis for the presentations, please have a look there, and many other very interesting case studies by colleagues from other institutions. So the way we're going to proceed today is that I'm going to give a brief introduction on the topic of sanctuary and on the conceptual framework spheres of sanctuary, and then I'll pass on to Raf to present his case study, his empirical findings, and then to Verena before we can then go over to the Q&A. So when we talk about sanctuary, what are we talking about? I want to start with a bit of an anecdote. The German speakers among us, I'm not sure if this is a German speaking phenomenon or only in Austria, but I'll go for it, might know that when kids are playing and they, for example, they're playing catch, yeah, here in Austria, they can go to a place and say, this place is Leo. Leo means you cannot catch me if I'm here. It's outside of the rules of the game. Everywhere else, the game is valid, but if I go to that particular spot, this one is Leo. Leo, you cannot catch me. Yeah. And this term Leo comes from the Leopold ring, which is a ring in the door of the St. Stephen's Cathedral in the center of Vienna, similar to the one you see in the picture here. And in medieval times, people, fugitives who have committed a crime or who are being persecuted for whatever reason, could hold on to this ring. And while hold on to this ring, they would be outside the scope of sort of mundane earthly justice and would be protected from being apprehended and put in jail or punished for whatever trespassing they had done. You can see a second picture that demonstrates this. This was common in several churches in Europe in medieval times. This tradition that there is a holy place or a place that somehow lies outside the earthly jurisdiction, in this case because only sort of the holy rules apply, draws on an even more ancient tradition that existed already in the Hebrew tradition, in Greek and Roman times. Here you see Cassandra holding on to a statue within the temple, a temple in the Greek temple, where it was believed that if you would hold on to this statue, because it is so sacred in the most sacred part of the temple, then you would also be protected from persecution, from being taken by authorities. Now, this notion, this very ancient idea of the sanctuary, of a place that is somehow holy for the community, and therefore nothing can be taken away from it, nothing can be captured while in it, that there is a space that lies outside of earthly justice, re-emerges in modern times as part of a protest movement in solidarity with migrants against sort of the violence, the injustice, for some even the immoral character of current border regimes and immigration regimes. Yeah? So social movements, movements of solidarity with migrants, religious communities, groups of citizens concerned with what is happening, sort of reignite this concept, instill a new life into it by seeking to create such spaces, whether in the framework of religious spaces and buildings or not, yeah, but spaces which would be spaces of welcoming, of solidarity, and of protection for those migrants who are either irregular or who are threatened with deportation, whose asylum claims have been rejected, or whose lives are at risk. In particular, we see emerging both in the North American context, Canada, United States, and in Europe, starting in the 80s, 90s, and accelerating later on. Three types of such sanctuary manifestations: cities, local level authorities that state that they are sanctuary cities, cities of refuge, cities of welcome, and adopt policies to protect irregular migrants present within their territory. We see churches also harboring irregular migrants and saying, while these people are here, they are somehow protected, and using the moral authority and the cultural particularity and authority of the church to protect these migrants. And also NGOs or groups of citizens that get engaged in trying to help migrants cross borders, help migrants who are in vulnerable situations at the border have this kind of safe space, be it by boats in the Mediterranean, be it by crossing the Alps from France, between France and Italy and other, or in Sweden, we have a case study in the special issue, people harboring migrants within their homes, and so on. So with the special issue, what we wanted to do was two things. First of all, to highlight and to analyze this phenomenon as such, because it has a broader relevance for migration studies, for social movement studies, for social and political theory. And the broader relevance I see in it is this idea of counter-externalization, a reverse movement to what we see states doing of creating spaces of exception where certain laws don't apply. Here we see sort of social movements or local level administrations creating also spaces that are exceptional spaces that seek to circumvent certain rules, but in solidarity with migrants to protect those who are subject to the border regime. How can we assess that from a democratic perspective, from the perspective of contentious politics, and from sort of the normative theoretical perspective as well. The research agenda that we established was, first of all, to conceptualize sanctuary, what falls into this category, how can we describe the phenomenon and conceptualize it theoretically, establish a typology of different kinds of sanctuary, and an analytical framework that would enable us to place cases within this typology, but also to use the typology, make it fruitful for a comparison between cases. So the idea is that we can, by using this typology and analytical framework, understand better similarities and differences between the cases in terms of how effective they are, what are the necessary preconditions for them to emerge, but also what kind of normative justifications are mobilized here? Where do the actors involved seek to draw legitimacy from? And very briefly, the idea of spheres of sanctuary in it, where this is a conceptualization and analytical framework that I have developed together with Rainer Bauboeck, who co-edited the special issue with me. We distinguish between three different types of sanctuary. Territorial sanctuary that takes place within territorial jurisdictions and is based on public policies, laws, and regulations, and is enacted by actors such as cities or counties or regions. Verena will be talking about a regional case. Social sanctuary, which takes place in a physical space, for example, of a church, of a boat, or some other physical space, but not a territorial jurisdiction, is based on social practices or maybe also on intra-organizational codes of conduct. We can imagine hospitals or schools, also campuses, declaring themselves to be sanctuary campuses. We have that phenomenon in the United States, for example, and in the UK to a certain extent. So these are non-state actors who are enacting these social practices here, civil society organizations, churches, networks of activists. And we have something that we have termed discursive sanctuary, by which we mean when there is a declaration, a public declaration, be it by a city, be it by an organization or institution, to be a city of sanctuary or a space of sanctuary. But there are not really public policies or measures, very concrete practices associated with it, except in the realm of public communication. So there is a discursive practice. There are symbolic measures, yeah, that might not be reallocating resources or creating effective protection against the law, but nevertheless, we believe there is an important role to be played here by this discursive practice. It might have effects on the lives of migrants if a city declares itself to be a sanctuary city, even if it doesn't have very compelling policies in place, just as it might play a role if a city has liberal, inclusive measures, but declares itself to be very hardcore, tough on migration. So the discursive element does have itself potentially implications, although we assume not as much as social or territorial sanctuary. So this is the conceptualization, 3 different spheres in which sanctuary can be enacted by different actors with different means and in different types of spaces. Yeah. And we assume that in each one of these, the normative justifications used to legitimize sanctuary will be a bit different. The effectiveness of the sanctuary will be a bit different in terms of really securing rights for migrants or protecting them from deportation, imprisonment, danger. Yeah. And the conditions for emergence might also be different. Yeah. So the typology can be used also as an analytical framework to try and compare and contrast between these different cases. I will now leave it here as an introduction. This is sort of the setting for then the empirical and theoretical analytical case studies that were done on specific sanctuary practices, policies, instances, cities, spaces, and so on. And here we will be able to hear 2 of them, starting with Raf and then Verena. Thank you so much, Raf. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia. And thank you very much to SPR Standing Group on Migration and Ethnicity for this opportunity for organizing, and to Julia and Rainer, who have done this wonderful special issue, and they've done really outstanding editorial and intellectual work. I'm very glad to be part of this project. I'm going to present one of the papers that is part of the special issue and has been co-authored with our colleague Els de Grau, who unfortunately cannot be here with us today. Yeah, as you can see, this is the abstract of the paper. You can download it. It's in open access. And yeah, so the work by Julia and by Rainer was very important, not just to host our paper, but also to engage in a reflection and to develop some kind of fresh insights on the topic of sanctuary cities. So the topic, of course, is city sanctuary policies. So we focus on the legal and the territorial dimensions, sticking with Julia typology. So on the policies adopted to protect and integrate undocumented immigrants into aspects of city life. And the research question we try to answer is, what are the key drivers behind these policies? And also, and most importantly, what explain the notable variation among them? Starting from the observation that not all policies are the same, and this is something that is already evident when we think about a typology or spheres of sanctuary. There are variations, and the variation we focus on, and the argument we try to make, is that cities are uniquely situated at a crossroad of local and supralocal context, which jointly explain variation in their responses to undocumented immigrants. From this point of view, supralocal might sound like an awkward word, but I think it's pretty effective to capture how we want to focus on it's a mutually exclusive concept vis-a-vis the local. So whatever is beyond the scope and the territorial confines of the local realm, of the local jurisdiction. In the paper, we focus on 4 cities in the US and in Europe, San Francisco, Houston, Barcelona, and Milan. So since we don't have a lot of time, I think I will try to focus more on the theoretical side of the paper and just give you a snapshot on the empirics. And so to make sense of variation across city sanctuary policies, we try to build bridges across distinct yet disconnected theoretical perspective. And this perspective stems from the long trajectory in the scholarship that has moved beyond national centers' perspective of migration policy making, so the so-called local turn, and we identify two notable approaches. And the first one is the localist, what we define as localist. And the overarching argument of scholars adopting this approach is that city officials operating in favorable local contexts where we have large immigrant populations, sufficient government resources, a progressive political culture, propitious institutional arrangements, and active community organizations, so social movement, NGOs that are vocal and robust and able to mobilize, the cities are more likely to enact sanctuary policies than those governed in cities lacking these attributes. The second approach we recognize is the supralocalist one, as we define it. And here, the main argument is that city officials navigating favorable supralocal context, meaning in terms of government decentralization, national migration, and citizenship regimes that partly at least focus on integration, are more likely to enact sanctuary policies than those operating in contexts where, for example, the autonomy of local governments is much more limited. National policies are way more focused on enforcement rather than integration. But also we try to see the limitations of these approaches in explaining city sanctuary policies. And what we see is that each of these approaches provides important insight into when city officials engage in sanctuary policymaking, but does not illuminate what types of sanctuary are adopted. And we try to offer a typology to distinguish different kinds of city sanctuary policies along two conceptual dimensions. And the first one is policy harmony. We mean by policy harmony, we try to capture a continuum of policies conforming to the goals of national immigration policies to those confronting them. Of course, the idea of sanctuary is precisely based on the idea that a sanctuary is oppositional. It's a safe space that opposes an outer hostile environment. But we can see a continuum of policies that are less or more confrontational. And the second dimension is policy content. So we try to capture a continuum of symbolic to substantive protections for undocumented immigrants. And by crossing these two dimensions, we identify 4 ideal types that, of course, are ideal, but we think might be useful as heuristic devices for comparative, especially for comparative work. So the first type is symbolic conformist, for example, welcoming city declaration that celebrate diversity in very general terms, celebrate hospitality. This is, for example, there is huge literature on UK sanctuary cities that are very much in line with this type. Symbolic confrontational, we're still in the realm of discursive and symbolism, but there is a more explicit and confrontational, in fact, a recognition of undocumented immigrants as legitimate members of city life. Substantive conformist kind of policies that provide welfare services based on existing national laws or court decisions. This is, for example, there is very crucial work done by, among others, Sarah Spencer and the University of Oxford on these kind of policies that are supportive of undocumented immigrants, but at the same time are enacted within the confines of the multi-level governance framework of a specific country. And last, we have substantive confrontational. So the typical policies that make services available undocumented immigrants while protecting them from apprehension, detention, and deportation. And in the paper, we try to elaborate a few, let me check out, the timing, some expectation, if not fully fledged hypothesis, based on localist and supra-localist perspectives, to what extent these different types are the product of different local and supra-local combinations. And I think here we can go a bit more rapidly, but the overall point is, for example, we take the first upper left quadrant, an unfavorable local context and a variably favorable super-local context can give rise to symbolic conformist policies. If we take the extreme example on the bottom right, of course, substantive and confrontational policies require a very favorable local context, so context in which there is a strong progressive culture, there is sufficient government resources, but also a supra-local context that allow to profit from these opportunities. So in terms of local autonomy and so forth. And of course, this very much draws on the multi-level governance kind of approaches on migration policy making, which see how try to describe and to explain how local governments, notwithstanding their subservient position, can craft their own policy agenda. So very rapidly, as I was saying before, we try to leverage our knowledge on 4 specific cities and engage in inductive theory building. The cities are similar in terms of immigrant population and undocumented immigrant population, but vary in their local and supra-local context, and rely on 107 interviews and other sources. Here is a snapshot of how the 4 cities vary across both the supra-local and the local context in which they are embedded. I will try to be very quick on this. We consider San Francisco as a substantive and confrontational example of sanctuary policies. It's one of the American cities that has adopted this kind of policies for a longer time. Beside the very well-known example of municipal services, healthcare, education, what is very innovative in this city is that undocumented immigrants can even serve in democratic governance structure of the city. So it's one of the most sophisticated and advanced experiment in the US. We have a supra-local context that is favorable due to the openings and opportunities made available by the federal US system, and the state of California is also notably pro-immigrant, and also a favorable local context in terms of public opinion, elected officials, activism, and resources available. Houston, we categorize the city as a symbolic and conformist example. The city has declared itself as a welcoming city, but there are no overall protections in terms of firewall protections, or there is no sanctuary ordinance. The supra-local context, interestingly, is favorable because we have the same federal context as for San Francisco. But city officials have not taken advantage of this context. And also the city is located in the notably anti-immigrant state of Texas. And we have an unfavorable local context with many conservative voters, a divided political landscape, a less developed infrastructure of community organizations, and a less generous tax base to rely on. Okay, so Barcelona, how much time do I have? Sorry, because I think it's over, right?
You still have a few minutes, don't worry.
Okay, thanks a lot. We categorize the case of Barcelona as substantive and confrontational. Also, the city has adopted the first sanctuary policies pretty early in the 90s, and these policies were further developed over the past decade. And this is pretty famous practice or policy put in place in the city is the access to the Padrón Municipal, that is the city register, basically, the city register that give access to assorted services. So through the register, what the city of Barcelona does is to, on the one hand, give access to services, but also use it as a proof of integration for regularization purposes. So in a way, this also kind of protects undocumented immigrants from detention and deportation. And also we have some notable example of democratic participation modes that is based on inclusion of organizations, immigrant-led organizations in the governance of the city. We have a supralocal context that is favorable within the quasi-federal system of Spain, and especially the fact that the state delegates key administrative tasks and implementation responsibility to local governments. In turn, local government can use this kind of state delegated powers in a way that is supportive to undocumented immigrants. And also, Barcelona is located in the autonomous community of Catalonia that is notably pro-immigrant. Also, we have a very favorable local context with a very progressive city government and political culture, a quite generous tax base to rely on, and a very vocal, a plethora of civil society organizations that are very vocal and in local playmates arena. And the last case is that of Milan, which we categorize as symbolic and conformist. So the city of Milan has seen almost 20 years of anti-immigrant policy making, until 12 years ago has been rebranded as a welcoming city by a new local government that locates on the central left of the political spectrum. So what the local government did was to give access to kindergarten to the kids of undocumented parents, following a decision of a court, and the local police raids on public transportation have been temporarily suspended. But on the other end, there is no comprehensive plan to include undocumented immigrants in public service provision, formal rights protection, or democratic participation modes. We have an unfavorable local context, given the high levels of centralization in Italian government system, especially in those domains that are crucial for the rights of undocumented populations, an increasingly restrictive and enforcement-oriented national policies, especially amid growing popularity of far-right politics, and a Lombardy regional government that is pursuing anti-immigrant politics for decades. But also an unfavorable local context, a divided political landscape. You have to imagine Milan is the city where Matteo Salvini has been raised as a politician. And so there is a very vocal anti-immigration front historically. And pro-immigrant policies have been built from scratch after 2011 local elections. So a lot of efforts have been put into dismantling exclusionary policies previously adopted. And collaboration between local government and activists has been often uneasy. So to wrap it up, we can say that the supralocal context sets important parameters for city sanctuary policy making. In the federal or quasi-federal system like US and Spain, we have greater opportunities than in centralized system. And also regional government play a crucial role. And also we have a local context that further influence how city officials engage in sanctuary policy making. So what we see is that in conducive local environments, city officials often perceive substantive and confrontational sanctuary policies as practically viable and politically expedient. And to conclude, we believe that more research is needed to build on, expand, and challenge our theoretical framework through systematic comparison of sanctuary policies in other cities. This is what I'm trying to do now with a new project. I try to use this theoretical framework to expand the knowledge on this topic. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raf, for this very interesting and easy to follow presentation. I'm now going to pass the word to Verena, who's going to present another case where also the interaction between multiple levels of government is key. Thank you so much, Verena. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody, including the ECPR standing group, of hosting me. It's a pleasure and a privilege, I think. But I also think that the paper that I'm presenting is, first of all, a shared work with my colleague from Aberystwyth University in Wales, Catherine Wine-Edwards. But our paper, I think, speaks very well to Raf's paper, actually. Raf highlighted very much the importance of the supra-local context, as he calls it. I will now talk in the next 10 minutes about this supra-local context, but I would call it's the regional level or the meso level of government, basically the level of government situated between the state and the city level. And Raf highlighted that it is important in his typology to differentiate between a favorable and unfavorable supra-local context and what that or the effect this context can have on the cities. And I will argue that this meso level of government is actually a very important actor in helping, assisting, supporting cities, and not only cities, but also the civil society and the third sector in enacting their sanctuary policies. And I will talk from the perspective of Wales. So I will give you more insights into Wales, which has declared to be a nation of sanctuary. Let me see, why doesn't this work now? Okay, so basically what we do in our paper, Catherine and me, is we look beyond the city level. We go one level up in the scale of the governmental levels, and we ask ourselves, well, what is the role this meso level of government can take in? What is the role these regions, provinces, Bundesländer, whatever they are called in each state, can do in providing or in implementing sanctuary policies and practices, and how do they do that? What means do they have at their disposal? And our article provides some important insights, we argue, in the theoretical understanding of how sanctuary is enacted at multiple levels of government. So far as we know, the sanctuary literature has very much looked at the very small scale local level or the most at the city levels. But starting in the US, there have been more and more states, such as California, that have declared themselves to be a state of sanctuary. This has been followed up by some Canadian provinces and finally reached also Europe in 2016, first of all. And it was Wales, or it is still Wales, the first and the only region in Europe to claim that they are not only a region of sanctuary, but they say they are even a nation of sanctuary. We have looked into that declaration, and we argue that this performative power of the symbolic declaration to be a nation of sanctuary has not just a symbolic impact, or is not just a symbolic policy, but has also concrete impact on public policies and has a concrete impact on the life of persons with a precarious legal status. How so? That is the aim of now my presentation. Well, I skipped that slide, but just to say that we collected both written data from parliamentary debates, parliamentary responses to a consultation, but we did also semi-structured interviews with a lot of actors on the local and the regional level in Wales that have been involved in sanctuary policies between September 21 and January 2022. So what happened in Wales? This concept of a nation of sanctuary emerged rather early in Wales, already in the 2014, 2015. There were discussions between the grassroots levels and various cities that declared, various Welsh cities that declared to be a city of sanctuary. And as you know, the city of sanctuary movement in the UK is rather strong. And out of this, the third sector and local governments were pushing the Welsh government to engage also in this process of sanctuary and to engage also with this concept of sanctuary. So it was the Welsh Refugee Coalition or that declared already or that issued in 2016 a plan and said that they want to build up a nation of sanctuary, or they said they want to engage in this term of of sanctuary. So the Welsh Parliament started a consultation of what sanctuary could mean in the Welsh context. And finally, in 2019, they published a governmental plan, the Nation of Sanctuary, Refugees and Asylum Seekers Plan. It was, as I said, a governmental plan. They were very, very proud of it, and they were also very proud of it, saying Wales is the first nation of sanctuary in Europe. So what is in that plan? Mainly, it is a declaration of commitment to act or to support all actors within Wales to act against the hostile environment of the UK by using all the devolved areas that the Welsh government had at its disposal, and that is mainly health, education and housing. The Welsh plan also had no specific focus on persons with undocumented or irregular status, but it included all persons with precarious socioeconomic and legal status, and also all migrants. So it was rather all-encompassing and not very specific. And it created a commitment for support for all the sanctuary movements on a lower level of government. So for all the sanctuary cities in Wales, but also for civil society movements, by adding a filter or by becoming a mediator between those local grassroots initiatives and the UK government. And in this Nation of Sanctuary plan, there was a very strong focus on Wales being a nation of sanctuary, and hence a very strong focus on the nation building aspect, differentiating Wales very strongly from the UK. The term sanctuary, interestingly, was not chosen because of its concrete policies or the concrete meaning, but it was chosen because it was a very vague term. Nobody really knew how to define it, and so all interviewees agreed that this term was a very was able to commit and support a very powerful narrative, setting the tone for positive actions, and it was very vague and hence also all-encompassing, that allowed the interpretation, or that allowed a joint interpretation of all the different actors. However, starting from this declaration of being a nation of sanctuary, there were some concrete actions and some concrete policies that the Welsh government supported, initiated, and then also implemented, starting from a large protest movement that started in 2021, when the UK government, without consulting any local actor or the Welsh government, announced to use a military camp in the south of Wales to host asylum seekers there waiting for deportation. And this announcement provoked a very strong reaction by the Welsh civil society movement, local actors, but also supported by the Welsh government, which was then able to also prevent the opening, or the camp was finally opened, but closed after a very short time again. So the Welsh government in that way was able to protect and to support and strengthen the local protest and the civil society actors, and hence it was mediating or protecting basically the actors at the local level against the UK government. It initiated also a number of firewall policies. The Welsh National Health Service implements a policy of don't tell, don't act. The Welsh government offers language courses to all persons irrespective of their immigration status. It offers employability support and training measures for all persons, again, irrespective of their immigration status. And last but not least, all persons, again, irrespective of their immigration status, are able to vote for the Welsh Parliament, the Welsh Senate. So from this declaration of being a nation of sanctuary, some small initiatives started. Policies have been initiated and are then implemented by the local actors. So we see that regions, so the supra-local context, as Raf calls it, or the sub-state level of government, has also a role in sanctuary, although it is not a formal competency that they can claim, but they can become the ally of civil society and third sectors. They can strengthen the position of the local level. They can unite basically the local level, all the cities, the third sector against the UK state. They can also become the mediator and filter and the protector of the lower levels of government, and the regional government can use this position to strengthen its own role as the guardian of Welsh values, which in the end contributes to the nation-building aim of the Welsh government. Of course, there are also some limitations. This power of the positive narrative can eclipse what is really happening in practice, or the fact that it is just some small initiatives, but there is no coherent long-term plan that is put forward in Wales. There are so many concerns from especially civil society associations that this governmental vision is personality-driven, and that it is galvanized by a handful of committed civil servants, but there is no long-standing coherent commitment. So to conclude, we argue that this declaration of nation of sanctuary in Wales is a symbolic, confrontational actually measure, as following the typology proposed just before by Raf. But nevertheless, it has a very, nevertheless, its symbolic purpose, it has a very important, it has some important implications. First of all, it provides a powerful counter-narrative, as all sanctuary policies do, but it allows a joint interpretation at the within Wales, and it unites all actors within Wales. And by that, of course, it strengthens all lower level actors, all civil society actors. And by uniting and strengthening all actors within Wales, of course, it can drive real change and can have also a real impact on the people on the ground. On the other hand, this piecemeal nature of the small initiatives fails to challenge systemic inequalities and discrimination, yet it demonstrates that also regions, also the sub-state level can claim an important role in the sanctuary policies and practices. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Verena, also for not using up all of your time, and so leaving us with more time for discussion, and of course for your very interesting presentation. Let me switch this for a moment. We have seen with these two case studies that are both within the sort of territorial sphere of sanctuary, how territorial and discursive sanctuary flow into one another, how cases can be placed, as Raf said, within a continuum between more symbolic policies, more and more confrontational or substantive, and confrontational or consociational. We have also seen that there are important factors playing a role in determining the type of sanctuary that emerges and its possibilities to really affect changes, as Verena have said, from autonomy, of course, within the multi-level setting, but not only, also advocacy coalitions, right? The extent to which local level organizations and so local level civil society organizations and governments at the different levels join into a coalition and a network. Another interesting question, which we have seen to a certain extent appear in Raf's presentation, is how does sanctuary relate to other types of policies that seek to protect irregular migrants, such as firewall policies, don't ask, don't tell policies, that don't need to necessarily exist in the context of sanctuary, but very often do, are an element of a broader sanctuary initiative campaign, on the one hand, and on the other hand, regularization policies. So really the step towards making people be no longer irregular, which is the only permanent and sort of comprehensive answer to the irregularity problematic, if you will, within the context of existing irregular migration, right? So one can try to eliminate irregular migration by controlling the borders, but once there is irregularity and people are irregular there, the only inclusive way of dealing with it would be permanently through regularization. Sanctuary and firewalls are somehow limited either in scope or in time. Right. So the relationship between these different forms of trying to protect and create inclusive solutions to irregular migrants is another aspect of this research agenda that emerges here and there. Also in terms of participation, the importance of legal status for democratic participation and how that feeds back into the sanctuary, and what tensions exist within the sanctuary coalitions. What are the limitations and what are the potentials? So there are a lot of issues to explore here, and I want to now open the floor for your questions and for the discussion.